for this camera for like 4 years. And that's not even an exaggeration. I'm a big fan of Blackmagic, and their cameras ever since the original cinema camera back in 2012 at NAB caused quite a stir with its 2.5K resolution, 13 stops of dynamic range, ability to record to RAW, Apple ProRes, and a ton of professional cinema camera ports, etc. for only $3,000. And that sort of set the tone for Blackmagic cameras going forward, of which there are now over a dozen models of crazy image quality and movie level production capabilities for a fraction of the cost of competitor cameras. Some of which their cameras have been compared to that cost upwards of $30,000. Now, that's not to say the Blackmagic cameras are without faults, and the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera was no exception. It only shot in 1080p at the time, which was quickly becoming outdated in the movie world by then already. The battery life was insanely horrible. It could only display in log color, so you'd have a hard time knowing what the shot actually looked like, etc. Now, despite this, they were used in films as recent as Avengers Age of Ultron as B cameras inside the cars as they were being flipped around in a scene. Now, after I bought that Pocket Cinema camera and tried to use it for a bit because I needed something that was smaller than my Blackmagic Ursa Mini 4.6K camera because I wanted to go to events and didn't want to lug that giant thing around. I ended up actually selling it and going for a Sony a6500 and then eventually into Sony a7 III, which is what I currently use and I'm shooting on right now, and both are great cameras. Now, I had heard rumors of them going to bring an update to that Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera for years and patiently waited until finally I was at NAB one year and they just surprised everybody and released it right there on the show floor. And it was called simply the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Now, needless to say, I pre-ordered it from B&H while I was standing there on the show floor. Eventually, months and months later, it arrived, and now months and months later after that, I think I'm probably ready to do a complete walkthrough on it for you guys. Now, if you're not familiar, complete walkthrough channels where I try to go through every single feature I possibly can on a new device so that you guys are better prepared should you be in the market to go buy one. And with that said, there is a ton to go through on this camera, so let's get started with the styling. Now, it's made out of carbon fiber polycarbonate, which explains why it looks like metal, but when you pick it up, it's way lighter than it looks. In fact, it's only 1.59 pounds. On top of the camera, we have a mounting point, our on-off toggle buttons to bring up ISO, shutter speed, and white balance settings, a button to grab a still, this is a capture in DNG RAW format by the way, a large record button, and 3 customizable function buttons that can be set to either be a toggle switch for different settings or a preset to jump to a specific value for a specific setting. Now, on the front, we have a control wheel that will adjust settings values whenever you are in that setting on the screen, or will adjust aperture otherwise. We have 4 low noise microphones that can capture stereo sound and are honestly one of the most impressive things to me about this camera. I managed to shoot in convention centers, at events for Huawei, etc., with nothing to record audio but the in-camera audio. And here's what that sounded like.
They are official. We have the Huawei Mate 20, the Mate 20 Pro, and then the Porsche Design RS, which is crazy expensive.
Now, we also have another record button that I was told was meant for when you are vlogging so that you can easily tap it without another hand, which is a very unusual thing for Blackmagic to put on a camera, but there you go. Now, actually, because of that button, and in the video that you just saw, I filmed most of my recent vlogs entirely on this camera just to see what that was like. And if you want, I'll leave a link below to some of those. Now, while on the front, we have a micro 4/3 mount and sensor. That sensor, though, despite being the same size as the GH5S's, has a much more cinematic look and supposedly higher dynamic range. Personally, coming from a Sony a7 III as my main run and gun camera and it being a full frame camera, I wasn't excited about going to a sensor that would have a 2x crop factor as well as less bokeh at similar aperture levels. But I grabbed a Panasonic Lumix G12 to 35mm f2.8, the equivalent of the 24 to 70mm on my Sony, and I have to admit, I'm pretty okay with the results. We also have a tally light to let you know when it's recording or not, which you can turn on and off in the settings. On the left, we have our ports. We have a 3.5mm stereo audio in port, as well as a 3.5mm audio out port, a full-size HDMI port, a locking 12-volt port, USB-C port that can be used to record directly to an external SSD, like a T5 for example if you want, a mini XLR port for higher quality microphone options that Can also use the supplied phantom power if needed. On the right, we have our media ports. Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K can accept CFast 2.0 cards as well as SD UHS 2 cards, one slot for each. On the bottom, we have our standard mounting port as well as our battery door that accepts Canon LPE6 batteries. They are about 2,000 milliamps or so, but I managed to find replacements here on Amazon that were about 2,600 milliamps and still worked. But regardless, battery life is not great. Now with that said, a friend of mine actually recommended this. And this actually mounts to the bottom of the camera and also mounts then to your tripod or whatever other mount you're using to carry the camera around, and it adds 3 hours of battery life. In fact, it's now the only way I use this camera because otherwise you're constantly swapping out those batteries, and there's definitely some issue with the fact that when you use the normal Canon batteries, whether they're replacements or the originals, the battery meter is wrong. Like, it'll say you have 20% left and all of a sudden it'll literally just die right there and then. And so that's not ideal, obviously. So again, from now on, I just always use this, and I'll leave a link below if you guys want to check that out. Now on the back, we have an iris button that'll automatically adjust the aperture when you press it, if it's set to auto, that is, and a focus button that will autofocus the lens. Now, you can also touch on the screen to focus to a specific area of the image, and double tapping the focus button will reset it to the center. Now, there is no continuous autofocus. This is a tap to focus or a push button to focus. Below that, we have a high frame rate shortcut that'll jump to the offset frame rate that you've set in the settings. So in 4K, you can set it up to 60 frames per second, and in 1080p, you can set it up to 120, but only when using RAW for some reason. Now we have a zoom button that lets you zoom in should you want to check autofocus, etc., or zoom in when you're playing back footage. Now under that, we have a menu button to get to the settings, and finally, we have a playback button that brings you to the footage on the selected media. Now let's dive into the software, which is very similar to the software for my Ursa Mini 4.6K, so I'm pretty familiar with it. First though, here's the viewfinder when recording. You have a full touchscreen, and thanks to a huge update Blackmagic did to all of their camera UIs not too long ago, it's way more intuitive than it used to be. Tapping on any of the settings at the top will give you a slider for that setting, which you can also use the control wheel at the front of the camera to control as well when you've tapped on one of these. So if you tap the icon at the top left, you can turn on and off and control the opacity or strength of your visual assistants. But we'll check those out in detail in the settings shortly. Now under that, we have an indicator to show you whether a LUT is being used or not, as well as if you are baking the LUT into the clip or just previewing it in the viewfinder. Now I'll get into more of what this is when we dive into the camera settings more in a sec. Now we have 23.98, 24, 25, 29.97, 30, 50, 59.94, and 60 frames per second for 4K, with an option to tap the off speed option to have it shoot in one speed and playback in another, like we mentioned before, i.e. shoot in 60 frames per second in 4K and playback in 24 to give a slow motion effect. Then we have shutter, which you can adjust the shutter angle from 0 to 360 degrees, and you can even double tap it to type in a specific number. You can also set it to auto, but it doesn't adjust quickly, just keep that in mind. Now you also go in and change it from shutter angle to shutter speed, depending on which one you prefer to use. Now for iris, you can adjust the aperture of the lens. You can also set this to auto, but again, it isn't that fast. Then we have the clock, which you can change from recording time to relative time. You can adjust the ISO from 100 up to 25,600, and the camera itself has a dual native ISO at 400 and 3200, which just means it can shoot at those with the least noise instead of just one, so you can get better low light shots. Further explanation of this for maybe another day. Now you can choose from the different presets for white balance, for sunlight, incandescent, fluorescent, etc. But you can also set your own under the custom white balance setting, including tint. And you can tap auto white balance for it to bring up a white balance adjuster that you can put on a white object or a white balance card preferably, and it'll automatically set the white balance. Now battery. Tapping the battery will show you the voltage, and when it gets under a certain amount, it'll automatically show a percentage of the battery left. At the bottom of the viewfinder, we have our histogram. At the bottom center, we have our media, showing how much recording we have left based on the resolution and format you're using. Tapping either will bring up the media menu that you can then switch between media and also format the cards. You can change the real number, the first number of each file name, that automatically increments by 1 every time you format the card for organizational reasons. Then we have our audio meters. And speaking of organizational reasons, if you swipe across the screen, you can get to your clips and project settings. These allow you to create a slate for each clip that you would use in a proper production to then be able to sort by this in post. It'll even grab lens data automatically, and you can choose things like interior, exterior, day, night, and tap good take to start clips that you like. You can tap on project and add the project name, director, which camera letter this is, and the camera operator's name too. Okay, now when you press the menu button, you get to the camera settings, which again are pretty intuitively organized into tabs. Record, here you'll find all the different options for the quality, recording formats, etc. We have codec and quality, and you can choose from RAW or ProRes. One is super versatile for editing, but huge file sizes, and the other is super optimized for editing workflows. Then you can choose the quality of each, lossless, 3:1 compressed, and 4:1 compressed for RAW, or HQ, 4:2 LT, and proxy for ProRes. For resolution, we then have an option to go from 4K DCI, Ultra HD 4K, and 1080p. Dynamic range. Now, in RAW, you can only be on film, as the nature of RAW is. This is the highest quality, but has no color data baked in. It's log footage for the most part. For ProRes, you can choose from the same log film for better quality in ProRes, or video, which bakes in the colors and less quality. And then there's a new one that I've not seen before, which is extended video, which Blackmagic says is a good mix of both, with quality latitude of film, but the convenience of video. Project frame rates. Here you can choose the frame rate for the project, aka what it'll play back in, and then choose off-speed recording to record in another frame rate, so slow motion or time-lapse as mentioned before. Preferred card, you can choose between the CFast and SD card to have it automatically record to whichever is the fullest, or each of those. Stop record, you can also tell it to stop recording if it catches that a frame has been dropped. Time-lapse, this lets you automatically set it to shoot a frame at different frame, second, or minute intervals to have it automatically record a time-lapse or a fast motion video. Detail sharpening, in ProRes you can set this to automatically sharpen the footage to differing levels. Record LUT to clip, this lets you record in the film log footage for higher dynamic range, but then bake the LUT, or lookup table, into the clip that's more convenient for your workflow. We'll talk more about LUTs in more detail shortly. Monitor. Here we have all of our settings for our display, the internal screen, and even any screen that is connected to that HDMI port. Which monitor? Now you can select between the LCD on the camera, the HDMI connected monitor, or both, and adjust the settings below separately for each. Now, clean feed turns off all the assistance and just shows the camera footage. 3D LUT lets you choose if you want to show the LUT on the monitor when recording in film dynamic range. If you don't have this on, you'll see it in log, which is grayed out and makes it difficult to adjust in my opinion. Zebra, which is your exposure zebra. Focus assist puts a red color on all the things in focus, and you can adjust the strength of this. Frame guide lets you turn on and off the frame guide we looked at when checking out the viewfinder. Grid turns on the grid for that monitor or not. Safe area guide turns on the safe area guide for that monitor that you select. False color turns on the false color guide for the monitor that you select. Status text turns on the text overlay on the monitor, i.e. the ISO level, shutter speed, meter, record time left, histogram, etc. Display, you can choose between the audio meters or the codec and resolution being displayed at the bottom corner. Screen brightness allows you to obviously adjust the brightness of the screen. Now audio, all of your audio related settings are here. Channel 1 and Channel 2 sources. You can choose here what the two stereo channels are getting their audio from. You can choose from the camera's built-in left and right microphones, a mono mix of both, the mini XLR line in or mic, 3.5mm audio in the left channel, right channel, or a mono mix of both, inline or mic, or none. Channel gain. Then you'll see the audio meters and you can adjust gain for each of those channels. Headphones and speaker volume. You can choose how loud to output the sound to either a plugged in pair of headphones or the speaker on the camera itself. And then XLR phantom power. You can also choose whether you want to provide phantom power to the connected XLR device. Setup. This allows you to make fundamental changes to the camera's settings. So things like date and time, which is pretty self-explanatory, language, which is also self-explanatory, shutter measurement, which you can choose between the shutter speed or shutter angle if you prefer, flicker-free shutter. You can adjust flicker reduction between the 50 Hz standard of Europe and most of Asia power and the 60 Hz standard of North America to have it try and minimize flicker when filming lights. Image stabilization. If the lens supports this, you can turn on image stabilization or not. Timecode drop frame. This will skip some frames when recording in frame rates in fractions like 29.98 and the 59.98 to make sure that the timecode of your project is accurate despite each second not containing a whole number of frames. Set function buttons. Now you can set each of the 3 custom function buttons on the top of the camera to different parameters and then choose if it goes as a toggle on and off or a preset, which is a specified value for a specific function. Then you can choose where that value is displayed, so on the LCD or HDMI monitor. Tally light. You can turn this on and off, and it's a red tally light on the front of the camera that turns on when recording, as well as choose the brightness of it. Software, you can factory reset the camera, calibrate the sensor, see the hardware ID, software version, and choose whether you want all clips to be able to be played back when you push the playback button or just one. And Bluetooth, which you can set up Bluetooth for the camera and connected devices. Now, keep in mind that there is only an iOS app for Blackmagic and there's no Android app. Presets. Here you can save presets that will automatically load all of the settings throughout the entire camera that you've set when selected. Now, handy if you have similar places you film at, as you can set that location, have the white balance, shutter speed, etc. all set up and ready to film with the push of a button. LUTs. Now finally, we have LUTs, which I've mentioned a few times already, but haven't properly explained for those that aren't familiar with them. Now essentially, this is a set of color information that can be applied to film dynamic range or log footage. Now, since log footage has none of this info baked into the clip, it's a constant flat base. Now, you can then either use the pre-installed LUTs that came with the camera, mainly to get the film look to look like their video settings is what a lot of them are for, or you can even go out and find other LUTs on the web that are specific to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K's film profile and adjust it to any number of other camera looks or even just creative looks. Now, these can be turned on and off on the clips and can be shown in the camera with or without permanently baking into the footage. Now, if you choose to not bake them in, you can then either use the same LUT in your editing software, like Premiere for example, to automatically apply it in editing and adjust the color from there, or edit it as film and adjust it on your own. To load these on the camera, here's a link below for the tutorial that I did on the Blackmagic Ursa Mini 4.6K, but it works the same for the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Now again, this camera's not really meant for this. It's not meant for vlogging, even though they put that button on there, etc. It's really kind of meant for more higher end production, like video, movie production, as opposed to these kinds of things. It's not to be said that it can't be used for these things, but it's not purpose built for this. Whereas a lot of the time I think something like an A7 III or something that has a lot more auto settings and is a little more lenient in terms of workflow for a sacrifice in some level of quality would probably be better. Now, if you wanted to use this camera for it, I think you could. Now that I found that battery pack thing, it makes it a lot easier to use. Those regular batteries in that thing are not great. I do not recommend using them in any way. They last maybe like 20 minutes and then they die. And sometimes they die randomly, like I said. So don't do that. Do yourself a favor if you're gonna get this camera and use it, get that battery. But if you set things manually every time and you have all of your shots planned out, you're not like running and gunning down the street and just filming, say, a vlog or recording your daily life, etc. It's a brilliant camera as far as the image quality is concerned. The microphones on it are fantastic, and it just has a very specific look. It looks more film-esque. It's not so clinical as, say, like the A7 III with the Sony lens, like what I'm using right now, the 24-70 would give you. And for $1,300, it's pretty nuts. Now, if you guys want to see some of the footage that I took with it, running and gunning, again, not the way that this is supposed to be used, you're welcome to do so. It's on the channel. I'll leave a link below. Also, though, I do highly recommend checking out Blackmagic Design's YouTube channel playlist that people have done all these short films using it, much more professional and talented people than I. So I will leave a link below to that as well if you want to check out that footage too. But there, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this camera, what you think of this video, etc. Love to hear from you guys. Don't forget to check out my recently relaunched tech blog, theunlocker.com. Link below if you want to check that, where I'll do a bunch of other tips and tricks and tutorials and articles and just things that don't make it here to video. Go check that out. You can subscribe to the email newsletter as well there. It's a weekly thing that I send out, and it's not annoying, I promise. Like this video if you liked it. Head to the channel and subscribe to that, and ding the bell next to the word subscribe if you want to be notified when I do new videos. Otherwise, though, as always, regardless, thanks for watching.